Am I waiting for the countdown? Am I waiting for the countdown? Hello. Welcome to this live stream of myself. I'm a doula. My name is Etecia, and I will be discussing fertility, orgasms, sexuality, and birth. And I thought it was going to be a good idea to go live today, just so that if people have questions, they can ask them in real time. Sometimes we have questions in the moment, and when we go to something after the fact, it's hard for us to remember our questions. And so I wanted to give people the opportunity to ask me questions in real time, because this is a topic that's not often talked about. So just before we forget, don't forget to like the button below, give it a thumbs up, so that this video can come up in the YouTube algorithm. And also, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it, and I'd love to continue to connect with you and share this virtual space with you. And yeah, let's get into it. So the topic today is going to be talking about pleasure and fertility as well as birth. Something that I think is often not discussed is the connection between the hormones that are released during sex are the same hormones that are released when we give birth as people. And so, let's start with the first hormone, oxytocin. Some of you may have heard of oxytocin before. Some people call it the love drug. It's a very, very powerful hormone that is present when we give birth. And actually, the Greeks, that word is a Greek word, and it comes from, it means swift birth. And so you have already the word, it means swift birth, but oftentimes that hormone is associated with love, the love drug. And so what does that mean, swift birth? Why is oxytocin there? And then also, why is oxytocin present when we're aroused, right? So that's another key hormone that is there. It's high in our bodies when we are sexually stimulated. And then lastly, it's a hormone that is very, very high in our bodies when we are breastfeeding, especially when we're making eye contact with our newborns. And then it's also very, very high in our bodies when we are laboring. So like when we're in active labor, and then also when we do skin to skin contact with the baby. And so what oxytocin is, aside from it being the love hormone, it really helps to make that connection and that bond to another human being. And at the same time, it helps to block pain. And so when we talk about the release of oxytocin during childbirth or during sex, that's something that's really powerful to remember, is the hormone oxytocin. And the next, I will talk about endorphins. When we are experiencing a euphoric state, like after we orgasm or also after we give birth and we feel that high euphoric state, that's endorphins that are kicking in. And those endorphins are usually released during labor as well. So it helps you to feel in that state of like spirit, and that you are connected to a higher source, a source outside of your body. So that out of body experience that people have during orgasm is also present during birth. And then lastly, the next hormone that I'll talk about that is connected to both sex and birth is adrenaline. And adrenaline is a hormone that can either stimulate labor or it can stall labor. And adrenaline is something that is what gives us our fight or flight receptors. It's also something that makes us feel like we can endure something or not. And so it's important that, let's say that you are having sex, that, you know, if you have adrenaline present, it could either be for a positive reason, like you're having sex in a place that you shouldn't and you're trying to do something like, you know, have a quickie, and it can give you this like rush of adrenaline. Or if you're having sex that's uncomfortable for you, then adrenaline can kick in and make you feel not aroused. And so the similar concept in birth. And so the reason why I wanted to talk about these hormones is because a lot of times when we think about hormones, we think about like PMS. That's oftentimes how we talk about hormones. We say, oh, I'm feeling hormonal, aka emotional. Or we may say that, you know, my hormones are acting up because we have acne or whatever. And so a lot of times our language about hormones is not always the most positive. And we also don't really, in our culture, we don't really spend some time talking about what hormones do in our daily life or in our experiences that are pretty impactful, like sex and childbirth and breastfeeding and things like that. And so how do we get to baby? Sex and fertility. So when we are trying to conceive and we have sex, or we do intrauterine insemination, IUI, we can put that up on the screen. So that is another way so that's when you put sperm from outside of a person's body. You get sperm and then you put it inside of the cervix of another person. And so that's called intrauterine insemination. And oftentimes you hear that shortened as IUI. And so when we're in that process of trying to conceive, so we're trying to place sperm into the cervix and successfully pair the two to create a fertilized egg, to make an embryo. That process is not so black and white. Oftentimes when we think about fertility, we think about, you know, feelings of inadequacy or adequacy. Am I enough? You know, do I have what I need to create this baby, this life? Is it the right time? Is it the right place? Is this the right person? Is my body in good shape? So all of those things usually run through a person's head. And oftentimes we forget the pleasure in it all. And so something that is really important to remember is those hormones that I talked about. And so when someone is trying to conceive, orgasms are very, very important, because so when our clitoris is stimulated, people with clitorises, when your clitoris is stimulated, it arouses the brain. It wakes up the brain to help to enliven the vagina. And so you get a rush of blood flowing to your vagina. Your vagina gets lubricated. You get a boost in oxytocin. Your oxygen goes up. Your temperature in your vagina goes up, meaning it gets warmer. So it produces this like perfect environment for a sperm to go and to thrive. And so that increases the likelihood of our for the sperm to survive. And so all of that happens all because of a clitoris being stimulated. And this is really important, especially for people who don't orgasm via penetration. It's really important to remember to stimulate your clitoris for orgasm. And at the same time, something that's also really important during clitoris arousal is that your entire uterus is lifted away from your muscle contractions. So it's lifted by your muscle contractions, meaning that it moves your cervix away from the semen pool. And so like when semen enters the vaginal canal, so it pulls around like the opening of the cervix. And so when you're having an orgasm or when your clitoris is being aroused, your cervix lifts up away from that semen pool. And it allows the semen some time to be lubricated by all of your vaginal secretions and kind of disguise itself in your vaginal secretion so that it can move its way through your cervix without kind of being attacked as a foreign invader. And so as the semen is gathered in that pool, it allows it some time to be modified in a way so that it can gain the ability to penetrate your fertilized egg, your egg to be fertilized. And so that's another benefit of clitoris stimulation so that you can increase your chances of fertility. And something that ensures that all of that occurs is also that your clitoris becomes significantly larger when you're ovulating. And so some people do fertility tracking, which is great. But of course, this is all about like, don't forget the pleasure. So even in your planning, your fertility tracking, don't forget the pleasure and everything. And so that means that, let's say this is your day of ovulation, check your vagina and you may see that your clitoris may be a little bit larger. Studies shows that your clitoris tends to become about 1/5 of larger than its normal size. And so when you think about that, that's pretty significant. That's almost a quarter of a size bigger. And so that's a good idea to remember that when you're trying to conceive, don't forget the orgasm. Some people, they, like if you're doing IUI, for example, they may go to a fertility clinic or they may have a midwife do it for them, even if they're a couple who is doing IUI. And that is something that can work for many people. But as well, something to keep in mind is that IUI is an option that you have to do yourself if you would like to, something that you can do at home, which gives you the opportunity to set the mood, light candles, have some aromatherapy going, and really create a pleasurable experience so that you can achieve orgasm after you insert the sperm into the cervix. So, and then also same thing for if you're having coitus. And so making sure that you are not just having sex for the fun of it, which is cool, but also have an orgasm as well. So what that orgasm does when your vaginal walls are fluttering when you have an orgasm, that helps to act as a vacuum, and it is able to kind of like suck the sperm out from the entrance of your vagina up towards your cervix. And so orgasm serves that purpose as well. So just remember that. And there's nothing wrong with also using sexual toys, vibrators, a shower head to achieve orgasm. And so no pressure if another person can't give you an orgasm. It's also important that you know how to give yourself an orgasm as well. And that could take some practice, and that's completely fine and normal and natural. And so if you have to practice before you start your fertility journey, then by all means do so, because it will definitely help you if you can achieve an orgasm. And so moving to birth, so once you've conceived, oftentimes when we talk about childbirth, we speak of childbirth in the sense of like pain, punishment, embarrassment, trauma, especially as Black people, and the adverse experiences that we see, especially in a hospital setting with maternal health outcomes and infant mortality rates. And so, how do we bring the pleasure into that conversation? And so, one thing to keep in mind, just for an example, so that we can set some context, is that 3 out of every 1,000 people who give birth experience orgasm or a pleasurable birth. 3 out of every 1,000. And so, I'm not sure how many of you may have talked to 1,000 people, but that's not that many people. It's really not. And so if you think about like 3 out of every 1,000 people have experienced orgasms during birth, to me that seems like a significant amount of people. And it's just unfortunate that we aren't able as a people to lift that up in our culture, because of the trauma, like I mentioned, that we are constantly bombarded with in our realities, in our daily life, but then also in the news and in the media. And so just when you hear those horror stories, also remember this fact. And so just kind of try to balance out the amount of input that you're getting so that you can help to center yourself in a space that is more open to the experience that you would like to have, and know that this is possible for you too. And so when you think about your anatomy, the way that our bodies are designed, they're designed to do what they do, meaning that you don't have to think too much about how to have a baby. Just like you don't have to think about how to make your heart beat, or you don't have to think about how to open your eyes. You just open them and you're good to go. You're animated. And so birth is a very similar concept, even though society tries to tell us that we need all of these different tools, we need to read all of these books, we need to go to all of these different classes. Those things are helpful because we become more disconnected from our indigenous way of life. And so those natural methods for being in tune with our body and caring for our bodies are not as in the forefront as they used to be, some millennia ago. But all that to say is that if you were in a dire situation, like you were in the middle of the woods and there was no one around, you would be able to have a baby by yourself if worse came to worse, right? And so just remembering that you're also a animal as well. So you're an embodied spirit, but you're also an animal. And so when we think about our anatomy and how we're designed to birth the way that we do. And our clitoris is also there for, it's one of the only orgasms that's there for our pleasure. And so when you think about that, our clitoris is also activated during labor. When we are in active labor, we get a flood of oxytocin to our body, which also enlarges our clitoris. And for some people, this can either feel like soreness, or it can feel like a sense of pleasure, like arousal. And so, so for some people, even the stimulation of their vaginal canal during birth, like something coming through their vaginal canal, even that for some people translates as pleasure. And this is oftentimes a concept that is seen as like, what do you mean pleasure during birth? But that is a lot of people's reality, or 3 out of every 1,000. And so when you think about that, what can you do to make sure that you are experiencing that stimulation? So if your body is already high in oxytocin, high in endorphins during active labor, your clitoris is enlarged by 1/5. And what can you do to continue to be on that path to a pleasurable birth experience? If your body is already on that track, then how can you then move your mind to be in that space of pleasure? And so one way to do that is to create an environment that makes you feel safe. Just like sex, right? If you want to feel aroused before you have sex, oftentimes we talk about foreplay. And a lot of folks talk about foreplay for them starts in their mind. And so if you are trying to create an environment, a birthing environment that is similar to foreplay, what are those elements that you need? And so when we talk about a birth plan, you may have heard people talk about birth plans. It's something that I create with my clients. It's what does your ideal birth experience look like? What does it smell like? What does the room smell like? What does the room look like? Who's there? Who is not there? Who you're like, no, that's not a pleasurable experience. I don't want them there. And what do you want to eat when you're done giving birth? All of those things, right? What music do you want to hear? So after you're done visioning what your ideal birth looks like, then creating an environment and having the support team that you need to help you create that environment is really important. And that includes having a doula that is there to guide you through the birthing process, and help you be grounded and help to ensure that you have the things that you actually want to have and be an advocate for you. And another thing that you can do is if you're in a hospital setting, of course, you can bring things with you to help it be a less sterile environment. So things like music, things like aromatherapy. You can't burn candles in the hospital, but you can have like a room mist or a room spray, essential oils and things like that. And some hospitals have birthing suites that have a tub. That can be something that's relaxing in addition to the room spray and the music and things like that. Also, affirmations are really helpful. That's something that you can type out or have someone type out for you and put around the room. Certain colors help to stimulate you and make you feel calm, like the color blue. So putting some blue fabric up to make the room look less sterile and less like a hospital. And so basically creating a very romantic environment that helps you to feel relaxed and calm and peaceful. And then if you're at home, of course, you have the pleasures of your home, and you have the ability to relax and be on your own time. And so if you're not birthing at home, being able to labor at home as long as possible is really something that can help you to have that pleasurable birthing experience. And so if you have a doula, usually doulas are trained to know when it's time for you to go to the hospital. And so I would definitely advise that if you have a doula that you talk about that as a part of your birth plan of, you know, I want to be able to labor at home as long as possible because I want to be able to set myself, put my mind up to have this pleasurable birthing experience. And so, you know, after you've set that mood, you create that environment, something that you can do is take a shower. If you are in the shower, some people, they may use the shower head to have an orgasm. Some people may stimulate their own clitoris themselves. If your water is not open yet, then some people also have sex to help the labor to progress. Because like I said, oxytocin is a very, very powerful hormone that's present and it's the love drug, right? And so when you release oxytocin during orgasm and it's already heightened during your labor, when you release that, it helps to stimulate the baby to come. And so people tend to, like, especially if you're having a stalled labor. So stalled labor meaning that the labor was progressing and now it's kind of like timed out in terms of how far your cervix has dilated, or how far apart your contractions are. And so sometimes midwives will actually recommend that folks try to have sex as a way to help to stimulate the labor and get it active again. And that's if your waters have not opened already. And so that's something that you can do. If you haven't left for the hospital already, that's something that you can do before you leave, or that's something that you can do while you're laboring at home. And some people may not want to have sex. And so that's why I said, like, being in the shower by yourself, being in the bath by yourself is something that you can do to help to relax yourself, and provide you with that boost in oxytocin. And I don't know if I mentioned this already, but oxytocin helps to block pain receptors. And so when you have oxytocin present, then your body doesn't read pain in the same way. And so that's another reason why the presence of oxytocin, which also activates your endorphins to come in, it helps it so that you can tolerate childbirth. And for some people, that reads as like, I can tolerate this, and I'm not going to take any pain relieving medications. And for other folks, it reads as a pleasurable birth or an orgasmic birth. And so the next thing is that when oxytocin is not present, and your adrenaline kicks in during labor, it can inhibit the production of oxytocin. And like I mentioned before, adrenaline is associated with that flight or fight response. And so if you're in an environment where you feel unsafe, where you feel afraid, where you feel annoyed, that can reduce your oxytocin because the adrenaline is blocking it. And so some things, like I said, to remedy that is if you have a doula, that doula can advocate for you and speak on your behalf to help to like shift the energy of the room, or ask someone to leave, or request a different nurse if you're in the hospital, or help you to have a conversation with your doctor, and ask the questions with your doctor that you need. So sometimes doulas can be there for you to kind of work through a scenario before you then go to the doctor and speak with them directly. And so that's something that's a really important piece if you are experiencing adrenaline during your birth. And meditation, the bath, music, things that help to calm you and ground you so that you're not experiencing like that anxiety and that fight or flight response. And like oftentimes people who feel the need to like they feel like control, like a need for control, or to you know, my baby needs to come at this date at this time because I really want my baby to be a Scorpio. Except like if there's like that piece that you're holding on to, sometimes that can also stall labor. And so what oftentimes happens is that we start to think about like birth in the sense of a number, like what time is it? How long have I been laboring? How far apart are my contractions? How much is my cervix dilated? And so we think of birth as numbers as opposed to tapping into that pleasure, to that spiritual aspect, which can also help us to be on this pathway to fear and start spiraling. And then our adrenaline, again, it starts boosting, which can stall labor. And so just remembering the pleasure, and creating those affirmations so that you can tap into that pleasure, taking some time to have an orgasm to stimulate yourself, especially if your body is already in a space where you're aroused. Taking the time to help your body with what's already providing for you is something that you can do. And I usually do like an herb of the day or herb of the video. And today it's not an herb, but it's a food. And the food for the day is yams. And oftentimes you may have heard people talk about how yams are really helpful for fertility. And studies have shown that yams help to produce a hormone called FSH, which is the follicle stimulating hormone. And what that does, so yams are really high in phytoestrogen. And so what that does is it helps to stimulate the release of the hormone that stimulates your ovaries to mature your eggs. And so when our eggs are released from our ovaries, they ripen like fruit. And so you can really liken a vagina in our menstrual cycle to the way that flowers blossom and then later become fruit. And so that's what happens when we release an egg. It's like a immature fruit, and then it ripens, and that's a mature egg. And then those mature eggs are what gets fertilized when sperm is inserted into your vagina. And so yams help with this whole process. They help to support this whole process. And because it's a fall vegetable, it's something that's very available right now. And so if you can add some yams to your diet, that would be awesome. But I see that we have one person who is still viewing, and if anybody would like to ask questions, please do so. You can type your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have about orgasms and clitoral stimulation in relation to fertility and childbirth. And thank y'all for participating. Oh, something else I wanted to say, because I forgot to say it before, is that with oxytocin, I know I've talked about that quite a bit in this video. With oxytocin, it's so powerful that it's been manufactured as a synthetic drug. So Pitocin is the synthetic form of oxytocin. And Pitocin is often used in the hospital to induce labor. And so when you think about that, so oxytocin naturally stimulates labor. It naturally puts our body in a space to both receive sperm. It puts our body in the space to receive our baby. And it also helps our breast milk to come in, and it increases when we breastfeed. And so they have manufactured oxytocin as Pitocin, but Pitocin, because it's the synthetic version, it doesn't hit the same. And so when you, make sure that you DM questions to me on Instagram at Letthemflourish if you have any questions. Thank you. But yeah, if you have, if someone is given Pitocin, it can often have negative effects because, you think about like any other synthetic drug, like, let me think of something. I was going to use like an extreme example, like crack versus like the cocoa leaf, the plant that people actually use in Peru for healing. That's a very different thing, and so I know it's an extreme example, but Pitocin is something that, if not given in an appropriate dose, if not given in the right setting, can cause adverse effects on the birther as well as the baby, because it stimulates contractions to start. They start at a very rapid rate, and they're very, very strong in a way that your body wouldn't normally experience them. And so it can cause your labor to kind of go into this really quick spiral into like a very extreme labor process, as opposed to like a slow and steady process in your natural environment. I just wanted to put that out there, that you may hear the word Pitocin oftentimes talk about when people are having conversations about birth. But when you hear that word, remember that Pitocin is synthetic oxytocin, which is something that your body naturally has, and it's something that we can tap into via our orgasms, via kissing, via hugs, touch, and clitoral stimulation. But yeah, so if you want to drop any questions in my DM at Letthemflourish, please feel free. For folks who are going to watch this after the live ends. If you have experienced a pleasurable birth, then please share your experience if you feel free in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, like the channel, share this video with people that you know who are pregnant or who are planning their pregnancy, and turn on your notification bell so that you know when we're going live again, so that you don't miss it. Thank you.